Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. The Kremlin says US Envoy Steve Witkoff will travel to Russia next week for talks on the US proposed peace plan. As tensions between the US and Venezuela rise, President Maduro warns he will defend the country against foreign threats. And the UK's Chancellor's budget is overshadowed by a technical error that released details of the spending review early as she announces various tax rises. Now, the Kremlin says US Envoy Steve Witkoff will travel to Russia next week as the US pushes for a deal to end the war in Ukraine. It comes after Ukraine reportedly agrees to the terms of a proposed plan, which Trump says both sides have had input on. Meanwhile, Trump has also said tomorrow's deadline for both sides to agree to a deal is no longer in place. Take a listen.
That's a standard thing, because he's got to sell this to Ukraine. He's got to sell Ukraine to Russia. That's what a deal maker does. You got to say, look, they want this. You've got to convince them with this. That's a very standard form of negotiation. We're having good talks. We started with Russia. We're having some talks with Russia. Ukraine is doing well. I think they're pretty happy about it. They'd like to see it end. And we won't know for a little while, but we're making progress.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Al Arabiya editor Wissam Keyrouz, who is right here in the studio with me, and broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster, who joins us all the way from Surrey. Isabel and Wissam, great to have you with me this evening. Always good to have you in the studio. Isabel, let's start with you, and we're going to talk about Ukraine because it has agreed to this amended peace plan. But is Russia likely to do the same? That seems to be the question everyone wants the answer to.
Yes, it's worth sort of pausing, isn't it, and imagining that if this wasn't such high stakes and so incredibly serious where blood was still being spilt, this is actually fascinating just in terms of the characters involved. You have President Trump saying tremendous progress is being made, and then messages coming from the Kremlin making it pretty clear that, peace is still a long way off. Look, I'm not particularly hopeful at the moment. I mean, I remain hopeful that there will be an end to the war, but I am concerned about sticking points that I don't really understand in the current format of this peace document, how it would work in practice. Ukraine have been very valiant, and despite being incredibly shoddily treated in the way that this was handled, Trump admitting there that they spoke to Russia first. Well, first of all, let's point out these aren't equal parties in this. One's the aggressor, one's the victim. You don't start with the aggressor in a negotiation. Anyway, they did, and Ukraine have been very gallant and have made amendments with Europe's support. But they are very clear that they want to become members of NATO and that they would like security guarantees for their future. Now, I don't see how that can happen without European support, and Russia is making it perfectly clear that NATO is a non-negotiable for them. They want no Western military anywhere near them, and no military presence in Ukraine belonging to the West at all. So, at the moment it seems intractable. I remain hopeful that that might change. It is worth pointing out, though, that the pressure on Russia is growing, despite Putin's propaganda machine very keen to tell his own people and perhaps some of their supporters in nearby Belarus and Hungary that things are going all their way. It's not strictly true. I mean, you have to look at the situation at home, that the price of their oil, $20 a barrel, cheaper than Brent crude oil. You've got the central bank selling off gold. You've got 25% of Russian companies at risk of bankruptcy. It goes on and on and on. There are real concerns that, this country can't raise capital outside of its own borders. They will have to stop this war at some point. Whether or not that is soon, I don't know. The only other thought I wanted to sort of pick up on is the comments from Vladimir Klitschko, one of the mayors, I think the mayor of Kyiv in Ukraine, and he has said that although he doesn't want it to be the case, he thinks that it won't be this negotiation that will be the end, that will be the deal to seal it. It will actually be Ukraine ceding territory. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that is peace by surrender, and I think Europe should do everything it can to make sure that that isn't the case. But I feel as though he might be right that that is the only terms under which Putin will agree.
And Wissam, as they say, there's no justice in peace a lot of the time. We've heard that before.
Yeah.
And Isabel talking about the aggressor and the victim, ceding territory, security guarantees, frozen assets. There's so many sticking points to this plan that we keep on talking about, and there seems to be no diplomatic bridge to bring the two closer together. All there seems to be is these diplomatic dances.
Although we feel this time there are clearer signals coming from Donald Trump and the Americans that this is actually probably happening, or it could happen. And we have signalings also coming from the Russians. You know, this war has come to a reality. Okay, if it drags for longer, it's very dangerous. The world has been on the brink of maybe a nuclear confrontation in Ukraine. It was clear that the West, especially America, does not want to take it further into the confrontation. And second, it is clear that the lines that has been drawn now on the field will not change. I mean, Russia has been successful in a lot of ways. And whatever deal will come, it will be, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, it's gonna be ceding lands. But one of the most important sticking points, or points to be fine-tuned, what Ukraine are we going to have? How nurtured it is? How weak it is? Is it really a very weak state that has no political dignity? And what about Europe? Now we will hear more and more from the Russians that the Europeans are trying to sabotage this deal because it is about Europe. And at the end of the day, what we see now, unfortunately for the Europeans and the Ukrainians, that this deal is an American-Russian deal. Americans are the guarantors of this, of course, and they are involved, and it's good for the end of the war. But what the Europeans will do, will they only be saying we are ready to support Ukraine? We're gonna see about that, but this is what I suspect was the goal of Vladimir Putin from the beginning, is to reach a deal with the Americans. It's about sitting on the bigger table.
And also, I just want to talk to both you and Isabel about Steve Witkoff and a leaked recording with a Russian official. So according to this leaked recording that did originally come from Bloomberg, they're the person who got the transcript of this, it was Steve Witkoff coaching a Kremlin aide about how to charm President Trump and get in his ear before Zelensky went to the White House.
And Trump was very happy about it. He didn't mind it. I mean, he said this is what things, how things happen. At the same time, does it say that Witkoff is biased, is not, the middleman? Of course. I mean, we could say the same thing about his boss as well. Trump, it was clear that they are fascinated with, what strengths projects Vladimir Putin. At the same time, Witkoff himself was the very channel that allowed this relation, that allowed every time you had a problem, you had a glitch in this Trump-Putin dynamic, he was the guy who made things work again. He was the guy who went to the Kremlin just a few days before announcing the very weird Alaska summit, which led to nowhere. I mean, he is the guy who was working on bridging the Trump-Putin dynamic. And he's still doing so. And he has the graces and the full support of Trump.
Isabel, I just wanted to get your thoughts on what Wissam said there and about Donald Trump defending Steve Witkoff after that leaked recording with that Russian aide.
Yeah, well, it's worth pointing out that, members of his own party, Republican in Pennsylvania, saying that these secret meetings and conversations are ridiculous and that these conversations should be had out in the open, condemning Witkoff coaching this Kremlin representative. But, he's out of his depth. I've said it before on your program, Leigh-Ann. This is a property tycoon. He's got a close bond. He's known as a deal maker, but that's kind of where his diplomatic experience ends. Yes, he's worked on the peace deal deal in Gaza, which, as we've seen, isn't exactly a huge success. But he flies around in this private jet, which hasn't got proper national security. His phones are vulnerable to being intercepted. He doesn't have a huge department within Washington to support him, despite the huge work that he's been tasked with. Where is Marco Rubio in all of this? You know, there are proper checks and balances and ways of doing things, and it seems as though for Trump it's all about his mate, the deal, and in this case, you know, we're seeing the Europeans being an afterthought. You know, this strange deal, it was played basically by Putin, wasn't he, being given this list of demands, and it was the former head of the MI6 here in the United Kingdom, Sir Alex Young, who came out and said that the proposal basically left Ukraine as a tethered goat, and what we should really be working towards is making Ukraine a porcupine, the porcupine strategy, so that it can't be consumed ever again. It needs to have strong armor and defenses. And so he has left Ukraine in a weaker position, and it is regrettable, in my opinion, but it's unsurprising that Trump has put his full faith behind him. Meanwhile, today we're hearing, you know, the ramping up of rhetoric from Europe, which I'm pleased to see. The Sweden foreign minister, for example, wanting more sanctions from the United States on Russia. And we're also hearing calls from the EU Foreign Affairs representative Kaja Kallas. She wants to see the pressure being increased on Russia. So, you know, there is this different approach from the Europeans and from the Americans. We've got a lot more to lose. We're much closer. But also Ursula von der Leyen has made it clear that she would like to see all of the frozen Russian assets being used as reparations to help Ukraine rebuild after this awful war, which has destroyed the country. America, on the other hand, Trump wants that money for himself, for American citizens. Now, obviously, they've invested huge amounts of money for which the world should be grateful, and I do believe he wants peace. But I do think that matters like where that money goes exposes an ugly motivation as well.
I feel like there's a lot more questions right now than answers, but hopefully we'll get more as we go on.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, I don't want to go against what, this narrative. Of course, there is an aggressor, and then there is an aggressor, there is a victim. But we also think that it's now the time to rethink the whole Russian question. What went wrong between Russia and Europe and the West after 1990? Why are we here? I mean, these questions has to be asked sometime. We always say that we are, the old world has vanished and the new world has not yet emerged. And I think whether it is with China or Russia or anywhere, not the Europeans, unfortunately, everyone is trying to say what is my part or my portion of the world that is yet to emerge. And in this world that is yet to emerge, Russia economically is a small player. Let's not forget Russia is smaller than Italy, is smaller than Spain,
France, yeah.
and smaller than France, of course.
Mm.
But I mean, in geopolitical terms and in geographical terms, they are huge. So is there a way to rethink this narrative? I'm not going against the narrative of aggressor and victim. This is the reality. But why are we here? Is it only because of the person who is Vladimir Putin, of the mentality? How can we build a better future for Europe that will always be here and Russia who will always be huge next to us?
But we say that Russia's economy is the size of Italy, is the size of France. It's not a huge scale of GDP. But we cannot forget that Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons. And that's always something that's made it have a big standing on the geopolitical front.
It's not alone. It's not Russia alone who has. If they will use the weapons, of course, it's going to be the end of the world, but it's going to be their end as well.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say some of their power also is not necessarily, based in money or in actual physical weapons. It's their cyber attacks and the destabilization of the West. And many people blame them for turning us against each other. And we are actually weirdly, and I would argue not coincidentally, seeing a kind of rise of the authoritarian, almost Putin-like model within the United States, where you have these oligarchs, these people in the inner circle who are given unprecedented access to power and to financially gain from a lot of the proceedings that happen within the country and around the world. So it's a really worrying sort of rise of totalitarianism. And you could argue that that has been disproportionately driven by Russia, and they've been incredibly powerful and damaging in that way.
So let's make democracy great again, because it's not as attractive as it used to be for a lot of people around the world, unfortunately.
We heard it here first. Let's make democracy great again. Wissam and Isabel, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. And tensions between the US and Venezuela are rising as President Nicolas Maduro faces increasing pressure from Washington, including military strikes on suspected drug trafficking ships and ongoing threats of invasion. Speaking in Caracas and waving a sword, Maduro vowed to resist any attempts to overthrow his government. Wissam, we're going to start with you as soon as we get there, but I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about this feud that we have seen bubbling under the surface between the US and Venezuela for weeks now. You might argue for decades, but we'll get on to that. Could we see Maduro actually overthrown? Is this now becoming a real possibility?
I mean, the build-up in the Caribbean, we have the biggest American aircraft carrier in the world who is positioned there. We have huge maritime groups who are positioned there. Is it about a war with drug cartels and small ships? Is it a war with, with unknown people? No, it looks like a very big thing. It could be pressure, yes, but pressure not against small players. It's a pressure designed and formed to change and have a big impact on Venezuela. It's a very big fish, Venezuela. It's the richest country in the world, although it's in oil, although it's very hard and costly to use the Venezuelan oil. But in a geopolitical term, this problem of Venezuela has been dragging for so long in the backyard of America. I mean, if you are in the mind of the United States, the deep state, this problem has been dragging for so long. Let's not forget that Venezuela, for most of the last century, was an ally of America, was a very strong ally. They were detrimental in helping the Americans win the Second World War. And then something happened in the end of the century, and we had Hugo Chavez, and we had this huge shift. We had this huge, support and money to all the pink, reddish wave that swiped through South America. And I think America, who is, like we said in the segment before, trying to think its place in the world that is yet to emerge. I mean, this is the backyard of America, and the Latin world is so present inside America, and America is so present inside the Latin world. And Maduro represents this unorthodox way that Latin America has went to. Maduro is the inheritor of Hugo Chavez, who is himself inheritor of the Cuban president or Fidel Castro. And this has been dragging since the 50s. This is about America's interest in the Latin world. Maduro's regime is definitely on the agenda of Trump. I mean, this is serious.
And Isabel, let's bring you in and talk about this, because Wissam just spoke to me there about Donald Trump and Venezuela being on the agenda of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's met some interesting characters while he's been president, even in his first term. Can you envision a meeting actually happening between Nicolas Maduro and Donald Trump taking place to try to simmer down these tensions?
Yes, I can imagine that happening. I think anything is possible, especially with President Trump, who, likes a deal, likes to be seen as a peace broker as well. I would say what's slightly different about this is that he is very much being the aggressor in this relationship, President Trump, and he,
the bully,
just this weekend, has designated this cartel a terrorist organization on a par with Al-Qaeda, and has put a bounty out as well for the leaders leaders of which he accuses Maduro of being, which means that the usual sort of legal restrictions on how you can operate in international law exonerate the United States, for example, if Maduro was captured and killed as part of that cartel, which will certainly have put Maduro's back up and make that meeting a little bit less likely. There are, I don't know what the actual sum was that was being offered. It was a huge amount of money. I think it was double what they were offering for Al-Qaeda's leader Osama bin Laden. So he's got literally a bounty on his head. Would you want to meet somebody with those kinds of threats floating about? There've also been lots of questionable moves within the Caribbean basin of these boats that have allegedly been carrying drugs. Now, that may well be the case, but these missiles have been used. I think 83 have been killed, and certainly experts in maritime and international law say that their deaths have been hugely legally questionable, which puts pressure on any relationship between the two leaders.
And also, just a quick thought from you, Wissam, is I was speaking to somebody earlier in Caracas, and he was saying life there's a cost of living crisis. Things feel really tense with what's going on, with Maduro now rallying the troops because Donald Trump is rallying his side. And it seems like a never-ending sort of story, and people are still having to live in the middle of this. We can't forget that.
Venezuelan people are already living in a very dire situation. And the Venezuelan anti-Maduro movement is also very big. Let's not forget that even though it's a totalitarian regime, somehow they have been winning with small margins the elections. And
but the last election has been disputed.
Yeah, it has been disputed, but at the same time, I mean, it's not like the regimes where you have someone winning 99% of the votes, and it's not true, it's not right. So Venezuela is not doing well, and Venezuela, they stand no chance if there is any kind of military action. But let's talk about the options of America. Will it be a full-scale land invasion? It's impossible. According to Foreign Affairs Council in 2018, such an invasion would need something like 100,000 soldiers on the ground. It's not at all on the agenda of Donald Trump, MAGA, no boots on the ground. Second, it could have some targeted strikes. This is more of a possibility. And third, undercover operation, and this is also a possibility. But in any case, if they ever sit together, I don't see it happening. I mean, even with Mamdani, it was a bit of a stretch, but somehow the character of Mamdani, who's also very, very intelligent and very emotionally intelligent, could say, okay, they are both very political animals and they know what to do. With Maduro, there is no common language. It's really two words apart. It could happen because Trump is so unpredictable.
And he met North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un. We can't forget that.
That one is good. I mean, Kim Jong-un, who wouldn't want to meet Kim Jong-un? I mean, Maduro has no... He doesn't have the aura or the weirdity of the persona. And Venezuela is still somehow, it's Latin America. It's not very far. You have something like 20 million people of Venezuelan descent. I mean, in America and Canada, or 15 million. So it's a country that is not very culturally away from America. And what will come next? I mean, you have alternatives. This is the big difference between North Korea and Venezuela, for example. You have alternatives in Venezuela. Venezuela is a country that is not very far away from democracy, from the West. You can generate something that could work out outside Maduro.
I wonder if Maduro would bring his sword to the meeting with Donald Trump if that ever happens. But anyway, thanks for...
Or his dance, maybe.
Yeah, maybe both. They can dance together. Let's move on to another story. And the British Chancellor's budget was overshadowed by an error today when details of the spending review were released early, and that was by mistake. The Office for Budget Responsibility has apologised and said it was a technical error. Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced various tax rises, with the opposition leader describing it as a total humiliation and actually called for Rachel Reeves to resign. Isabel, I must say something. You are in the UK. No one has stopped talking about this budget, but how much damage has this technical error had on the British government today? Like, what a mess.
I mean, hugely chaotic and embarrassing. And look, even though Rachel Reeves this evening will be one of the most hated figures in the United Kingdom because she's just introduced £26 billion of tax rises for working people in this country. But even so, I actually felt incredibly sorry for her. Did you see the footage of her face as somebody handed her a phone and she was reading the information about the leak? I mean, it's unprecedented. It's never happened in the history of leaks. And she'd already been heavily criticised for trailing way too much of the budget. She'd been trialling out some of her policies and then totally U-turning on them, using the press and the public and the markets, quite frankly, as a sort of active focus room. But, has it done any lasting damage having leaked it? No, but it just, I think, will have done huge damage to the credibility of this government. They certainly seem to be chaotic. There are, lots of unhappy Labour MPs, Labour voters, non-Labour voters, because remember, this was a landslide on a very small number of people, weirdly. The electoral system here has made it a very strange situation when he's won this landslide without a huge amount of love behind him, and this enormous number of MPs, very few people in the general population being supportive of the government. Their popularity ratings are terrible. And as I said at the beginning, £26 million in tax rises. And we had one of the former chief advisors of the Bank of England today describing it as Labour's fiscal fandango. It's embarrassing. And, I'm talking about the perspective and the sort of headlines here in the UK, but I feel embarrassed about what you guys in Dubai must make of us. We were once the leaders of the world, and now look at us.
I think that's a question for us, Wissam, but really to you. I watched the budget unfold and the chaotic scenes of the OBR, but we must remember that the budget in the UK will be watched by all the markets and all the global leaders and people who are watching the economy. How is the UK being viewed? Because, Isabel was giving us the look from inside London. How is it viewed on a wider scale?
Well, as an outsider, if I may say, the UK, just even before talking about the budget, the influence, the image, it's so important to the world. And let's not forget that this budget gives us a glimpse about the mood, about the atmosphere within the G7, within the economies of the West in general. It's still about austerity, still about more taxes, and still about not being able to find a solution to have, to redress the whole thing. Now, it's also interesting to see that how this whole budget story unfolds when the very image of London in the world is also much more these days, unfortunately, about stealing watches and phones than about, museums and great stories. So this story is unfolding with a certain degradation in the image and the narrative and what people speak, unfortunately, which is definitely exaggerated, but it's also speak tons about how the world is now seeing the UK. Although it's so important because the UK is so important, because so many people look up to this country. We're so influenced, so emotionally attached to this country. And at the same time, Brexit is 9 years ago, happened. We have plenty of questions. Where did we get to? And not many answers. And the big reality in the world is that the West, the economies of the West, is not creating happy people, not in the UK, not even in America, and mostly, and definitely not in the rest of Europe, which is also dragging in the misery of not finding a way to get out of this, economic dilemma.
It's almost like an economic doom loop happening at the moment. We go lurch from one crisis to another crisis to another crisis.
Yeah, and more taxes is always the way, and it's obvious that it's not leading anywhere. So.
It's a difficult situation to be in, and I think, Isabel, I lived in London for 15 years. I absolutely love the UK, but it just seems to be that there's a lot of unhappiness, like Wissam does say, and especially the chaotic scenes we've been coming out of the government for the last year.
Listen, I love this country. London is still a fantastic city. I've never been mugged. I've never seen a mugging. I don't know anyone who's been mugged. So you will always have these horror stories, and perhaps it's getting worse than it used to. But we still have Big Ben. We still have the royal family. We still have lots that we're incredibly proud of. The harsh reality is that British citizens are increasingly fed up with their politicians and are turning away from politics. And that comes back to something we were talking about at the beginning. It's a dangerous position for democracy when you seem to have constant chaos in government. It's a huge turn-off, whichever party it is, because we've had many years of it with the alternative before. And the danger, of course, is that you see the rise of populism in all of this. People who are offering easy answers, people who are pointing at different people, vulnerable people, and blaming things on them. That's not the solution. Strong democracy is. And I think, Rachel Reeves, the history books will judge her whether or not she's got it right today. But unfortunately, she has 100% reneged on her election promises. She said she wouldn't raise taxes for working people. She said that all of the growth that she would preside over would solve the problems and be able to increase spending in public services. None of that has happened. So, she's had to back down on her own promises. And will she have left the country in a better state? The OBR said that people will be feeling worse off at the end of this 10-year period than at the beginning of it, which I would say is a pretty poor and depressing legacy.
And we're going to move on from that story, but thank you for your thoughts on that. And have you heard of 6'7" taking over TikTok? Apparently it's a trend. It's the viral meme taking social media by storm. And kids and teenagers can't get enough of it. That includes the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who's joined in with school children this week. It's even made it into dictionary.com, who have chosen 6'7" as the word of the year. I mean, Wissam, you've got daughters, you've got children. Can you talk us through this trend and where it comes from? And I don't know, just background.
6'7". Okay.
What's the hand movement that goes with
Well,
it?
I mean, it's one of those things that go viral, go trendy everywhere, and people, they just don't understand why it is. And sometimes, I mean, the big problem of our times is that if something doesn't have a meaning, it doesn't matter. I mean, you still have to deal with it. So actually 6'7", I mean, and one of the things that I have found is a very old way of saying things in English, and it could be traced back to Shakespeare, who was talking about the 6 and the 7s to talk about something that is confused, that is not right. So whether this trend comes from Shakespeare or even before Shakespeare, we don't know. We just know that it's a phenomenon that reflects how more and more young generations, especially the Alpha, we're not talking only about Gen Z, about Gen Alpha or younger, are ready to embrace, to get involved in something that they don't understand, just, to be in a trend. Second, it's also a product of the world of social media where things do not really have meaning. I mean, we spend time and hours just being dragged by content that we haven't chosen, first. Second, that doesn't present anything. And to the point where we have a very brilliant paper in the Times today asking whether we are in the post-cultural world where, in the 16th, 17th century, the democratization of reading was the main driver of every single revolution that came before. The Enlightenment, the Lumiere, the Industrial Revolution. Now we don't read anymore. Our attention span is only 20 seconds. Where is it leading us?
It's not even that long. Isabel, not even 20 seconds, my attention span. Isabel, you have children. 6'7", is this a thing in your house?
6'7". I'm sorry, I promised my kids I would do it. They came home from school just before we came on air, and they were saying it just, completely spontaneously. And I said to them, "Oh my goodness, I'm talking about that this evening on the TV." They couldn't believe it. But look, despite a valiant attempt there from Wissam to sort of intellectualize its origins, I'm afraid I do think it's just one of those nonsensical things. But I take a slightly different position. Yes, you can, dismiss it as brain rot. But, we were just a breath ago talking about how miserable everyone is in the Western world. It makes me smile, it makes the kids laugh. And just to cheer everybody up even further, my son is currently tucked up in bed, reading a book. He reads every night, several chapters. You know, we're not all doomed. You can enjoy silly memes and also expand your brain.
I like that idea. We can all have a little bit of fun, can't we? And 6-7 brings it in. In my day, it was the Spice Girls. That was fun, but I think no kid would want to listen to them now. Anyway, let's move on because it's that time of the show where Isabel...
The Spice Girls, they have problems with their own kids now.
Oh, do they?
I mean, one of them at least.
Oh, yes, that is true. Victoria Beckham has problems. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Good point. He's maybe thinking 6-7, I don't know. Anyway, it's that time of the show where you guys have chosen your own quirky story. And Isabel, we're going to talk about being famous. Apparently, it's really bad for your health, just as bad as smoking is.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And this is a proper bit of research that's been done by a German university and published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. And they studied a huge number of singers, 50% of whom had become stratospherically famous and 50% of whom had just been normal on sort of music network. And what they found was that their successful singers and famous singers were actually more likely to die than the unfamous singers by 4 years, which is quite significant. And they found that 33% of people who are successful in music are likely, you are 33% more likely to die than non-famous people altogether. So that is a really shocking statistic. Having bandmates lessens that probability a little bit. You're only at risk of death by 28% compared by going solo. But the question is really why. You know, you're hugely wealthy, you're adored, you get whatever you want, you click your fingers, you have everything you've ever want, you get to see the world, you have a huge house. You know, you can have multiple wives or husbands and children, all the sort of things that so many of us dream about. So why are they so unhappy? And I think that is really, really interesting and fundamentally comes down to what makes humans happy. This is to do with the scientists in this particular paper. I think it was to do with the intense psychological stress that these sorts of people face. And what I'm talking about is intrusion of privacy, you know, the inability to do anything without feeling like everybody's looking at you. I think Robbie Williams wrote a really interesting post in the summer about something like the 14th selfie he'd been asked for on a flight when he was flying solo with his kids, and he always realizes that it's the price you pay of being famous, but you also can never just have one moment when you're on your own trying to get from A to B with your kids who are all kicking off because they're hangry and they want to watch their screen and it's not working. I mean, we are still human, and you know, they have all these wonderful things, but they also have absolutely no privacy, which I would hate. Public scrutiny about their weight, about their, you know, every choice and decision that they make, they're followed, every opinion that they make is extrapolated upon. Awful. And of course, the pressure to perform as a singer. You know, you've got to continue to, well, in many cases, sing and dance, but also, you know, trying to get chart success, repeated chart success, create new music. So I think it sealed the deal for me. I'm not going to enter into X Factor this year. I've decided against it.
Well, I can't sing, so I won't be entering either. I cannot sing.
Main reason I haven't done it before.
I think if I sung on stage, everyone would leave. It's like, it's diabolical. But
I have been told that I could shatter a windscreen.
Yeah, I think
not in a good way.
I think if we did karaoke.
It's weird. Everyone knows that famous people eventually are not so happy.
Yeah.
I mean, we have seen the stories since
Britney Spears.
Ever.
Yeah.
Britney Spears. I mean, Whitney
Marilyn
Houston,
Monroe, yeah.
Marilyn
Elvis
Monroe.
Presley.
Every single very famous person, Dalida in France, they haven't been happy. And yet, everyone, or a lot of people want to be famous. Why? Is it, you know, a bit of narcissism maybe?
Yes.
A bit of, you know, wanting to be loved? A bit of, you know, searching for validation, searching for something. But, you know, we know that some people have been born to be famous. They have been born screaming, projecting, you know, the personality, becoming an icon.
Donald Trump?
Maybe. And also, whenever they start becoming famous, we start crystallizing them to making them even more of an icon. So they are not icons in the beginning. This is why icons have to remain silent. You know, icons have to not talk,
Yeah.
because the more they talk, the more we know they are humans.
Yeah, and I guess that's so true. And they also say never meet your icon. But I will say one thing, your story, I think something that would make us all happy,
It's a bit of an
even
icon of
famous
itself.
people, is licking pigs in blankets. Because apparently Aldi has launched lickable pigs in blankets wrapping paper.
What's not to like about a paper to be licked just, while eating your favorite Christmas treat, which, by the way, is one of the most amazing things that, it comes from Britain, I believe. And the best I had, a pig in a blanket was in Borough Market in fantastic London, which was really amazing. And now this amazing, invention by Aldi, the wrappers itself, they are smellable, they are lickable, and you have all the goodness that comes with the great, pig in a blanket on a paper. Let's not forget that a lot of this technique and this technology was used to please animals and pets by, creating papers and wraps that have certain smells and and now they are using it with people. We have also seen, papers that can be eaten, on the wafers, on the cakes. So this technology has been used before, but now having it on a wrapper for pigs in a blanket for Christmas, I think it's amazing. I would personally buy it, honestly. And
No, I can't believe it. Everyone would be licking the wrapping paper. Isabel, would you...
Blankets are just so delicious, but don't mix them with wrapping paper, for goodness sake. I can't think of anything worse. Also, when you put your Christmas present under the tree, will the dogs start ripping it open? What about the cat? No, this is not a good idea.
I was actually just, now that Isabel said it, I was like, my dogs would literally eat every single present. I maybe would try to lick it. I wouldn't be sure if I want to lick the whole roll, but I'll give it a go, because apparently it's vegan and I'm vegan, so I haven't eaten a pigs in blanket in 20 years or so.
There you go. It might be the closest you can get to it.
So that might be the closest I can get
but
to
I
licking
have seen pigs in
wrapping
blanket, vegan pigs in blanket.
Have you?
Yeah, I have seen it.
No.
Yeah, they exist. It's just not a real pig.
Not a real pig. But there we are. Pigs in blanket wrapping paper and all about fame. That was a great show. Thank you so much for tonight's guest, Al Arabiya editor Wissam Keyrouz, who's of course right here in the studio with me, and broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster, who joined us from Surrey. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on X. G&T will be coming up next. Goodbye, thank you, and have a good evening.